Commodore fans, are you ready? It's time for another episode of the Vandy247 podcast on the 440 Sports Network. Keep it locked right here for the best Vanderbilt coverage. Whether it's Clark Lee on the gridiron, Mark Byington and Shea Ralph on the hardwood, or Tim Corbin on the diamond, the Vandy247 crew has you covered. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Also, like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's free and easy to do. Follow the crew on Twitter, Apple Podcast, and Spotify for podcast episodes. Lastly, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. And now, pull up a chair. It's time for another episode of the Vandy247 podcast.
Good morning, Commodore fans, and welcome into another episode of Vandy247 Live here on the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick. Today's basketball podcast is brought to you by The Wash House. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy? Let the laundry professionals at The Wash House take care of that for you. They've got 2 convenient locations in the greater Nashville area. Just drop off your dirty laundry, and their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh and clean laundry ready to be put away. Log on to washhouseclean.com or stop in today and get your time back. All right, on the show today, we're going to talk all things Vanderbilt basketball, probably go 30, 40 minutes or so. We'll take your questions and comments. Going to be joined by Tim Thompson here momentarily, the radio color analyst there on Vanderbilt basketball games on 102.5 The Game, also on 94.9 The Fan with Kevin Ingram. Does a great job. So we'll talk all things Vanderbilt basketball there. Just some notes. Obviously, Missouri downs the Commodores 75-66 over the weekend, and as a tough loss. Obviously, Jason Edwards had 20 points. MJ Collins had 13. We'll dive into that game and what Tim Thompson saw when he was down there in Columbia. And we'll also take a look at this South Carolina matchup coming up on Wednesday at 5 o'clock, an early tip-off, and then Tennessee on Saturday at home. So big week for Vanderbilt basketball. And without further ado, we're going to bring in our buddy Tim Thompson. Tim, how you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Doing great. And I want to start, Tim, but without anything on this season yet. When I want to go back to when Mark Byington was hired at Vanderbilt, what was your initial reaction? And when you got to meet him, got to talk with him, and got to watch some early games in his tenure there in the non-conference, what did you begin to learn about him and what the future of Vanderbilt basketball would hold under Coach Byington?
Well, it's funny because, I worked for Nike for 25 years. And so I had some contacts within the basketball industry when this whole thing was going down. And so, I was communicating with those guys. And, when I found out that Coach Byington was kind of on the short list, all those guys that were in the know in college basketball said, this guy can coach. I mean, he's really good. And so I was excited about it. And then, when Candace announced him, I talked to him a couple times, and, I could tell that there was a style about him that he was 100% invested into college basketball. And, I've always said, with this new process of the transfer portal, NIL, all that kind of stuff, you got to be a different kind of coach now than you were even 3-4 years ago. It's not just high school recruiting and, trying to recruit 5-star players and get them in here. This is about recruiting high school players. It's about understanding the transfer portal, recruiting the transfer portal, being on the transfer portal 24/7, investigating players that might go into the transfer portal. And then, again, it's all the other stuff that goes along with college coaching as well. And I think Coach Byington and his staff, I really like his staff. They all understand, and they bought into, okay, this is what it takes in this new era of NIL, transfer portal, all that kind of stuff. They have guys on the staff that understand. So Coach Byington doesn't have to do everything by himself. He's got a really solid staff that he can depend on and lean on. And I just, when all of a sudden he came in, and I'll give you this background, I think he realized that the players that he had here just weren't probably good enough to probably win in this league. And he made a concerted effort to really go hard into that transfer portal. And as you can see, the roster has just been completely flipped. And, we were 12-1 coming out of the pre-conference. And, there were games, we played at Virginia Tech. We really played at TCU. It was a environment that it wasn't their home arena, but it was still in Fort Worth. So you win games like that. You go to Charleston, you beat Nevada, you beat Seton Hall. I think he's done a really good job of revamping this whole roster. Now, do I think, or probably does he think and the staff think that, this is a roster that doesn't need to be further, developed down the road? I think that's continuing all the time. I don't care what program you're in. If you think you have a set roster for NCAA college basketball, you're foolish, because I think what's happening every year now is you're going to have to re-recruit the kids you have on your team. You're going to have to go into the NIL portal or the transfer portal, and you're going to have to understand the amount of money that you have available for NIL. And but again, I like this team. I think it's phenomenal what he's done in that short period of time before, practice even started, how he went out and got these young kids that kind of fit into his system. And that's the other thing. I love his system. It's a system where, you're free to do a lot of things. He spreads the court. I don't think any of those kids ever feel like if they miss a shot that they're going to get taken out. That mentality of not worried about whether you make a mistake or not. And, again, we go down to LSU, and I had a really nice performance. AJ Hogard, had a great game down the stretch, about a 6-minute stretch where he scored 12 points. We end up winning that game, come home against Mississippi State. And I'm going to tell you right now, Billy, Mississippi State, they could win this league. That's how good they are. And, we were down 5 with 4 minutes left. And one of their players just hit an unbelievably contested 3-pointer to put them up 8. I thought if we would have gotten a defensive stop right there, having the ball down 5 with 4 minutes left and put a little bit more pressure on them, now all of a sudden it could become a different game. But we just never gave up. We were competitive. And then we go to Mizzou, and we started out slow again. We kind of started out slow against Mississippi State. We started out slow again against Missouri, got down, I think it was 12 early. And then I'm not sure how many we were down at half. I think maybe 9 at half or 11 at half. I think it was 9 at half is what it was. And then we come out, we get down 17, and all of a sudden we make a couple changes in the lineup. We have MJ Collins in the lineup. We have Chris Magnon. We have Edwards in the lineup. We started scoring. Defensively, we were getting after him. We cut the lead to 1 with 2 minutes left. And I told Kevin on the air, I said, we had possession. I said, if we score here and go up 1, now all of a sudden the pressure all just unfolds on Mizzou at home, being down 1 under 2 minutes. And we turned it over on 2 straight possessions. And I think that was really the difference in the game, that we just didn't take care of the basketball during that stretch, which, over the course of the season, we've done really well with the style of play that we play. I think we've done an unbelievable job of taking really good care of the basketball. I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but we've taken care of the basketball. We've gotten good point guard play, and I just think I'm really excited about this team. We play South Carolina on Wednesday, which I think is a winnable game, and then we've got Tennessee on Saturday, and that's a game that's going to be pivotal as well, because I think you can get a quad one game like that at home and get a win. A really high quality Tennessee team. Now all of a sudden, your net and everything else in trying to get into the NCAA tournament is just it ramps up.
As you can see, Tim Thompson knows his stuff when it comes to Vanderbilt basketball. If you guys want to fire any comments and questions at him, I know we've got a few comments here, but feel free to fire any questions you've got for Tim, and I'll fire them back at him. I'm glad you mentioned the net. Tim, Vanderbilt sitting at 42 right now, Tennessee at 4, South Carolina a little bit further down at 91. So if you beat South Carolina and then you mention you beat Tennessee, all of a sudden that's a big net jump like you talked about. But I want to ask you about, we saw this team in non-conference, 12-1, right? That they're rolling. You mentioned the win at Virginia Tech and beating TCU basically, at their home gym, and the loss to Drake was tough. I think we learned a little bit about them there. But what have you learned in terms of some deficiencies in regards to the 2 SEC losses? Because in my mind, they're fixable. A lot of them are fixable. Now Vanderbilt is not the biggest team, right? Byington has admitted that. But in your mind, Tim, what are some deficiencies that you've learned about this team through SEC play, and how fixable are they in your mind? And can this team continue to try to work to fix them, to try to get into that tournament?
Well, I think, to Coach Byington's point as well, we're not the biggest team. You have McLaughlin at, probably 6'8", Carey 6'7", big wide body. And the one thing that I think Coach Byington has done over the past few games is I think he started it really at TCU when we beat TCU down there, is we were playing both those guys at the same time. And so the one thing I think that he's starting to look at is maybe utilizing those two guys in the lineup at the same time, as opposed to, starting McLaughlin and then having Carey come in off the bench, I'm sure that will continue to happen at the very beginning of the game, but throughout the game, I think he's starting to realize that he probably needs some more size, against a Mississippi State. I mean, you look at that team right there, the length of that team was unbelievable. I mean, You saw, Cameron Matthews, who is 6'7", 6'8", and he's a guy that can guard 1 through 5. He can guard a post guy. He can guard a point guard. They're 5 guy. Really, all their guys that they threw out there on the floor could guard 1 through 5. And I think, that's one of the areas that I think Coach Byington looks at a team like that and goes, okay, we need more length, that kind of thing. I think that's the one thing in the SEC that sometimes gets lost, is the length of these athletes at some of these schools. And Mississippi State was a perfect example of, a 5 or 8 guys that are so long at all their positions. So I think, if there's any kind of deficiency at all, I would say, we probably need a little bit more length in this league. But again, this is year one in his, in his tenure. And I think he's learning every game about, what I need to do to recruit and coach and everything else. I just think he and his staff are really on the right track.
Tim, you slipped up in calling it the NIL portal. Justin says, I like the NIL portal instead of the transfer portal. That's kind of what it is in a way.
It really, I don't know if you saw what happened at Tennessee, but Coach Barnes came out and said, Chaz Lanier, he said, you're getting paid to do this now. This is a whole different mindset and mentality in college basketball now. And I thought him coming out and saying that was, I was kind of taken back. I was like, wow, head coach is coming out and saying, hey, dude, we're paying you to shoot and make baskets. Now it's not about these are, student athletes anymore. They do go to class and all that kind of stuff, but they're being paid to play basketball. And so now there's a different kind of pressure on these kids, not only by the coaches, but even by the fans. The fans, I mean, I've always tried to be where, when I'm announcing, these young men are trying their best. They're student athletes. They're going to school. They're getting an education. And I just never try to criticize players. I just think, no one's out there, trying to screw up. But, the mindset has changed for fans now. It's like, hey, so-and-so, you're getting paid X amount of dollars. You better start performing for whatever school you're cheering for. Mm-hmm. And so now all of a sudden the pressure on these kids becomes completely different than what it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. We're back, when I played. I mean, when I played, we had a scholarship and a $15, laundry amount that we were able to get each month. That was it. But now it's, you're talking thousands and millions of dollars that these young kids are getting. And so it's a whole different ballgame. It is completely changed.
Yeah, NIL portal. That's probably a better name for that. Yeah. Not surprised Rick Barnes was one of the first coaches to do that, by the way. We do have a question from Justin. What ranking site do you use, Tim, as your go-to for a fair evaluation? I know there's KenPom out there, and a lot of times KenPom and Net are pretty different. Vanderbilt's KenPom rating, I think, is 52. The Net has them at 42. So, a lot of times you'll see some differences there. But are those the ones you look at, Tim? Are there any others that you like to look at?
Those are about the two that I look at. I concentrate on the Net really more than anything. I just think that's probably the viable one for the NCAA selection committee and, what it does in, all the things that are happening now with quad 1 games, quad 2, all that kind of stuff. I mean, we're playing in the SEC right now. So, I don't know if there's going to be anything other than a quad 1 game, when you start evaluating that. So, I depend, for the most part, it's on the Net rankings.
Well, and in those Net rankings, Vanderbilt 3-0 in quad 3 games, 7-0 in quad 4, 2-1 in quad 2. As I mentioned, 1-2 in quad 1. So those are some of the numbers there. Ryan asks, is there enough offense in the starting lineup, and will we see a change? Will we see some shifts in the lineup? I like the idea of moving MJ Collins in for Huffman. What do you think, Tim?
Well, again, that's a coaching decision. But when you watch the Missouri game and when we were really making our comeback, you had MJ Collins in the game, and I thought he played an outstanding game. You had Chris Magnon. Those two guys are legit SEC defensive guys that can play with anybody. You look at a guy like Magnon, he's big enough. He can guard a 4, he can guard a 3, definitely, and guard a 2. Maybe not so much, maybe a 1, but MJ can probably guard 1, 2, and 3. So you got those two guys from a defensive standpoint, and then you've got Hogarth was in the game during that time as well. I don't know. The only thing that the coaches are probably evaluating now is, okay, we started slow against Mississippi State. We started a little bit slow against Mizzou. What do we do to maybe remedy that? Because again, that's okay to start slow against Southeast Missouri State, but when you're playing SEC competition, you get down in a hole a little bit. Now all of a sudden it becomes, very detrimental when you're down 10, down 12, that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I think it wouldn't surprise me if something like that happened. But the thing about it is, I look at the roster and I see the 8 or 9 guys that play, and you look at the minutes for each one of those guys. And, you had Edwards coming off the bench, but he was leading in minutes. I've always been one, it doesn't make any difference who starts. It just, and Coach Byington's always said, we want impact players, and we don't care whether they start or whether they come off the bench. They want to be impactful to the game. And I think Jason Edwards has been very impactful, except for, when he got hurt against LSU and then against Mississippi State. I still think he was dinged up against Mississippi State. He wasn't full speed. And so I think he was 0 for 8 from the field, 0 for 5 from the 3-point line. But we've got to have his scoring. I mean, he's averaging 17, 18 a game. He's one of those guys that has to be in the lineup, because he can score.
Yeah. Did you take much? I think there was some negativity coming from the Mississippi State game. He was obviously hurt and really didn't play a ton in that game, Tim, as you mentioned, but got back going again there against Missouri. So do you feel like that Missouri game, was more of a, okay, this guy can score. And late in that Missouri game, Tim, it felt like, oh, wow, he's at 16. He's at 17 points, quietly almost. He just finds ways to score. Did that Missouri game kind of tell you, okay, he was obviously banged up against Mississippi State. As long as this guy's healthy, this team can win games. But you saw on the other side, when he's not healthy and when he's not in there, that they can struggle to score, like you saw a little bit there against Mississippi State.
Absolutely. I think if you take your leading scorer off any team and he gets banged up and he can't play, it's dramatically going to affect the way that you score. He's just one of those guys that I've always said he just has a knack for getting the ball in the basket. And it can be 3-pointers, it can be, runners, it can be floaters in the middle. He just has a really solid knack for scoring the basketball. And I think that the Missouri game kind of got his confidence back a little bit, that kind of thing. The Missouri game, we were down 17 the second half, and we got cut it to 1 with 2 minutes left and then had those 2 turnovers in a row. And I just think, I wish we could have those 2 possessions back again, because I think it would have made a huge difference in the game if we were able to convert on one of those 2 possessions.
Justin chimes in and says, how different does this team look with Kajani Wright in this lineup? You want to take a stab there, Tim?
Well, I saw Kajani early before, really before practice started, before he had his situation with his heart. And, I just think he's one of those guys that gives you so much athleticism. He's not one of those guys, he's 6'10", but he's not one of those guys that 6'10", 240, 6'10", 245. That's not him. What I would consider, he probably looks a little more like, a 6'10" Kentucky guy, athletic, runs the floor, that kind of thing. So he's not going to give you a crazy, probably, physical presence inside, but he's going to give you the kind of athleticism where, a pick and roll where all of a sudden off that pick and roll, you can just lob it to the rim and he goes and gets it and dunks it. I mean, those are the kind of things that I think that he's going to be able to offer Vanderbilt, running rim to rim, going, after a missed shot, sprinting the floor. He's so athletic. He's so fast. I think that's going to really, really help Vanderbilt down the road. Now, again, I don't think he's going to probably play this year just for safety reasons, but, he could be a guy that I think could really impact the team with his athleticism.
We do have another one here from Justin. He asks, how is Wright different from Jalen Carey and JQ Roberts? Tim, obviously Carey is a little bit more versatile, but you mentioned Wright. He's a guy, and we may not see it till next year, but can run up and down the floor, like you said. So those are the kind of big guys it feels like Byington is going to be trying to go after.
Yeah, I think what Coach Byington wants is, he always talks about spreading the floor and spacing and all this kind of stuff. And I think, Wright, he'd probably be able to go down to the block a little bit, but like I said, he's not that kind of physicality, guy that's going to just bury you down low at the block and dunk on you. It's going to be a different. Now, Carey is a little bit different. He's that big body, 6'7", 6'8", 235, and he likes to get down low at the block and body you up. JQ is a guy that really hadn't gotten much playing time, but he's a guy that probably is more athletic, closer to Kajani because of how he runs the floor and that kind of thing. So again, I just think they're different kind of players, and I think Wright is a guy that Byington likes because of how I think he can spread the floor and how he can run the floor.
All right, this South Carolina matchup, is interesting. South Carolina is going to be desperate. Obviously, we talked about how desperate Vanderbilt's going to be. What are the keys here? Because this game's early. It's a little bit of a different tip-off, 5 o'clock. They've got the triple header there on SEC Network. I'm not sure how much you've looked into this matchup yet, Tim, but obviously important for Vanderbilt, because you look at the difference between South Carolina and the net in the 90s, a game that Vanderbilt can and probably should win. They'll probably be favored. We'll start with that Carolina matchup. How big is this one for this team?
Well, I think it's, very big. I mean, you look at South Carolina now, and I think they're 0-3. I'll be honest with you, I have not started my prep work on South Carolina, but you got Studi, who played at Vanderbilt, who is now out because he's got a blood clot in his leg. So he's a guy that was a starter for them that is no longer going to play. Murray Boyle's the guy that, in my opinion, he's a really athletic kind of 5-man, 4-man, can run the floor. That to me, if we control him, I think if McLaughlin can control him, I think we have a really good chance of winning the basketball game, because he's kind of what makes them go. If we can put him in a situation where we hold him to 15 or less and probably 10 rebounds or less, then I think it's a whole different ball game. But I think it's an extremely important game. If you're looking at the whole thing, net rankings, like you say, Billy, and wanting to get into the NCAA tournament, I think this is it could be a must-win game for us right now, because the next one you have is Tennessee, which is winnable, and then you go on the road to Alabama, which is that's crazy. And then you come home and you play Kentucky. So we have some murderers row, in my opinion, after this South Carolina game: Tennessee at Alabama, and then Kentucky back at home.
Yeah, South Carolina, Willie says he's watched them. They're better than Drake and LSU by a mile. I'm not sure if I'd agree. Drake's really good. Maybe LSU.
I don't know. I'm telling you.
Because they almost beat Auburn on Saturday.
I know. I hope Willie has watched Drake since we played him. I'm telling you, that team is a group of older guys that coach brought from his Division II program. And these guys, that guy, sometimes I don't even think he has to coach them, because they understand the system and everything that they do. I was so impressed with Drake when we played them. I'm serious. Drake play South Carolina 10 times, probably 5-5.
Yeah, no, Drake's really good. Obviously, South Carolina is really good too. They almost knocked off Auburn there on Saturday. I'm with you on Murray Boyles. I don't know that there's anybody else on South Carolina's roster that really scares you. They do have Pringle, who can be a load down low. Jacoby Wright, who's been there for a little bit. You feel for Studi, just an awful situation for him. He was averaging a little over 5 a game for them, so hopefully Studi is able to get all that figured out. I've got another one here for you, Tim. And again, if anybody has any other questions, comments, feel free to fire away. This team that their ceiling, we like to talk about. Well, if they get to 7, what does that look like for their tournament chances? Well, it probably depends on who you beat, and you'd probably agree with that. But an 8-10 record, if you're Vanderbilt, might get you into the tournament. Now that's going to be tough, right? You're going to have to knock off. You're going to have to steal some wins probably at home and see what you can do on the road. But in terms of a ceiling for this team, how would you start to talk about that for them? And there's still a lot to learn about this team. Byington's still learning about them. So how would you go about talk about the ceiling of this team and whether or not you think they do have what it takes to get into the tournament?
Well, I do think they have what it takes to get into the tournament. I think they're developing defensively. Second half against Missouri, I thought we really played well defensively. We can't continue digging ourselves in a hole early in the game. I think that's the most important thing, that we've got to remedy that. But I've talked to Kevin and friends, and we talk now. I think if you 12-1 pre-conference and you win 8 games in this league with the way that the league's net is, I think you get in. I do. Now 7, but to your point, if you get 7 wins and you beat the right teams, you win, you take care of business in South Carolina, and then you win against Tennessee at home, win against Kentucky at home, be in a situation where you're beating some elite teams, even though they're at home, but you beat those teams. Now all of a sudden, I think you're at 8 wins. You have, some, ability to be able to get into the NCAA. And I'm going to tell you right now, Billy, if this team, from what we saw last year to where we are right now, if this team gets in the NCAA, Coach Byington probably should be Coach of the Year.
Yep. I've heard the same from some other people. I think Kevin might have actually mentioned that last week with me, but good to have good basketball back. Vanderbilt, obviously big game Wednesday, and then Saturday could be a really good environment at Memorial Gym, especially if Vanderbilt's able to win on Wednesday. The environment was really good. I remember going back and listening to the broadcast a little bit, and I think you and Kevin were a little bit, man, it's nice to have this back here in Memorial. And, obviously the students showed up, and, hopefully that there'll be a good crowd there Saturday. And that brings me to a question I've always liked to ask people, especially in and around Vanderbilt basketball. We might see a good environment Saturday, but man, you've seen some really good atmospheres there, obviously playing for Vanderbilt there in the late 70s. And I didn't know this, Tim, one of the longest tenured broadcasters in the SEC, entering your 25th year as a radio color analyst for the Vanderbilt Sports Network. So congrats on that. But what's the loudest you've ever heard Memorial Gym? And I know for some of the younger fans, they may not be able to recall some of the 80s and 90s, but I have a feeling that might be in your answer because it was a different looking and feeling gym back in the day.
Well, and again, the whole TV thing, Billy, has changed the whole environment. And when I was playing, you had the game of the week on Saturday, okay, and that was the TV game, and you didn't have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday games, and you didn't have 7 of them on TV that you could watch. So it made going to the gym that much more important because you were going to be able to watch your team. And that's the one thing that I, sometimes, all of a sudden I look down and I see what the start time is for, a Vanderbilt Auburn game. Starts at 9:00, and on a Tuesday. And most families that have young kids, they're not bringing their family to the game at 9:00 on a Tuesday because it's on TV. They'll stay home and watch it on TV. So that, in my opinion, detracts a little bit from what Memorial is all about. I remember when I played, and we played LSU back when they had, Jordy Holtberg. They had an unbelievable. They were ranked number 1 coming in to Memorial that game, and you had students showing up hour and a half, 2 hours before the game, playing cards out on the sidelines of the gym. And really, if the fire marshal would have walked in that gym, he'd probably shut the game down. That's how. I know there had to be over 17,000 people in that gym that night in particular. But what happened with the TV, and now like Mississippi State game. I thought the Mississippi State game was a really good environment, and I think after what's happened the last 6 years, I think it's almost like, hey, prove to me that Vanderbilt basketball is back, and that's the onus that is on Coach Byington and the staff. And in my opinion, it's not fair, but winning games takes care of everything. You win games in that gym, people come. You've seen it. So I just think it's one of those things where the fans will support it. The students. I thought the student section the other night was great. You got game on Wednesday night. This week against South Carolina. So all of a sudden, again, it's 5:00 game though. So it's it's a little bit earlier. So you're going to be able to get some of the younger people that are bringing their kids. But a game on Saturday, I think the game's 2:30 off the top of my head, something like that. That place should be rocking on Saturday. So, but again, the gym gets louder the more you win. It's that simple. There's nothing that can replace winning basketball games in Memorial Gym. It's that simple. And I think that we win basketball games, there'll be people, clamoring for tickets and coming to these games because they love Vanderbilt basketball. And I think what they see now in Vanderbilt basketball, the way Coach Byington has this team playing and his style of play is conducive for people saying, hey, this is going to be fun to watch. It's not going to be walk it up, get into your half court set, run 37 different plays. It's going to be up and down. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be shooting threes. The freedom that these kids have. I'm here on this podcast right now saying, if you're a Vanderbilt fan, you need to get your tails to the game because this team is fun to watch and they're gonna win games.
Yeah, I'm with you on everything you said. I think number one, it's a fun style, and number two, you also get to come in and watch like Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky back. The Alabama games in Tuscaloosa, but Tennessee and Kentucky back-to-back home games. And then Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Auburn. Those are some huge chances for Vanderbilt to pick those teams off. So it should be fun. Obviously, you mentioned Saturday should be a really good environment. 2:30 there against Tennessee. Tim, we got to do this more often. I'll definitely be staying in touch. But good luck on the call Wednesday, and then of course Saturday there against Tennessee. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks. I enjoyed it. And anytime that you need me to come on, let me know.
All right, that's Tim Thompson, the radio color analyst for Vanderbilt men's basketball. Does a really good job there with Kevin Ingram. Most nights on 102.5 The Game here in town. You can also hear them on some other nights when the Preds are on 102.5 The Game on 94.9 The Fan. Thompson entering his 25th year, or is in his 25th year as the radio color analyst for the Vanderbilt Sports Network. Also played at Vanderbilt in the late 70s. Always good talking hoops with Tim Thompson. Again, Wednesday night, 5 o'clock, we'll have Joey Dwyer on tomorrow to look at that matchup. And then Wednesday, hoping to get Luke Wyatt back in the fold and Chris Lee as well with the roundtable episode. And then Thursday, I think we're going to reconnect with Joey Dwyer. But we might do a double dip with Robbie and then Joey tomorrow. We'll see what we got. But again, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Wednesday, 5 o'clock. That game will be on the SEC Network. And then Saturday, Tennessee at Memorial, 2:30 on the SEC Network. So thanks again, everybody, for checking in to Vandy 24/7 Live. This podcast has always been free. We plan for it to be free. Here's how you can help keep it that way. Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast or Spotify. That helps us get noticed. If you're listening and haven't subscribed to VandySports.com yet, please do. That is $99 a year. VandySports.com. Vandy247.com. I'm still I still need to change those reads there. Subscribe to our Vandy 24/7 YouTube channel. That is free. And then, as Chris Freeman mentioned in our beautiful sounding intro, that sorry, I just lost my train of thought. As Chris Freeman mentioned in our intro, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. And speaking of that intro, big shout out to Chris Freeman there. Did a really good job with that intro. So thanks again to Chris Freeman. Thanks again to Tim Thompson. Hit that like button, subscribe, and we'll see you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Central Time here in Nashville, talking more, mostly Vanderbilt basketball, a little bit of football probably there with Robbie Weinstein. Big thanks to Tim Thompson. I'm Billy Derrick. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon with more episodes of the Vandy 24/7 podcast.